Before we jump into it today, I wanted to extend a quick invitation. If you've not yet joined us inside the podcast newsroom, you're going to want to. That is the place to get the answers to your most pressing podcast questions. Simply head over to thepodcastnewsroom.com, sign up for your private feed, and you will receive a link to submit your question to be answered in a future episode. Can't wait to see you. Again, thepodcastnewsroom.com. You're showing up consistently. You're putting in the time. But is your podcast doing the job you've hired it to do? If it's not driving sales or building relationships with potential clients, if it's not achieving the purpose in your business you built for it, it's time to make a change. Welcome to the More Profitable Podcast with Stacey Harris. I'm Stacey, and this is the spot to learn more about the strategies, tactics, and tools you need to build your more profitable podcast. My team and I work every day with podcasters like you to shift shows from frustrating time sucks to productive members of your sales team, because your show should be built to generate and convert leads. So let's get into it. Today, we're going to go through and look at some red flags that can tell you your show's not doing what it should be doing. We're going to walk through a little bit of an audit you can give your show to identify if it's showing up in the way you need it to show up. And most of all, we're going to talk about how things like support and outsourcing can help you do a better job in the recording so that you're getting a better output overall. Also really helps from a marketing perspective. But again, we'll get into that. I'm stoked for this one. It's going to be a big one. This is definitely one of those episodes where you might have questions. So be sure you are dropping those over at uncommonlymore.com/AMA. That's the place to drop your questions. And if you want to hear the answer to the question, you got to make sure you're subscribed to the podcast newsroom. You'll do that over at podcastnewsroom.com. But I have a sneaking suspicion this one might lead to some really great questions, because we're going to really putting the power in your hands. We're going to talk about DIYing a bit of an audit to identify if your show's really delivering the way you want it to, because it doesn't mean your show's bad. It doesn't mean anything you're doing right now is wrong, but it might mean it's a 1% change somewhere. It might not mean, and it almost never means, a wholesale revamp, restructure of your show. Most often, there is a lever we can pull here or a tool we can change there, and it makes all the difference. So let's start by getting into some of these red flags. So these are the high level things without doing an audit you might be seeing that are signs your show is underperforming. So consider this review day, performance review time. I know we all just got a cold chill up our spine, right? Performance reviews. We're the boss now. So we get to give a performance review to our team member, and our podcast, it's a team member, babe. So red flags that your podcast is underperforming. First and foremost, you're seeing zero engagement. So you're not getting DMs. You're not seeing calls show up on your calendar, sales calls, coffee dates, whatever it is that you're using for that. You're not seeing shares. You're not seeing people say, hey, this podcast was great. This is something I love to see, is people sharing the show with other people who can be helped by it, because I'm always, always, always looking to make sure that we are meeting the audience where they're at. And a really good indicator of that is the audience knowing who it's for, because they can identify the people in their circle, in their world, who are also going to need the information that I'm sharing. So that's huge. Another red flag is your podcast isn't driving people to your offers or next steps. And notice I didn't say nobody's buying, because I actually want to see if there's actually anybody going from your podcast to wherever you send them. So that could be an increase in your social media following, but that could also be a link on your page. So using something like UTM links or specific short links via your podcast so that you can see where traffic is coming from for your show. So this is something it's sort of top of mind right now for me, because we are going to be launching something in the spring that is going to allow you to just go and buy something without having a conversation with me. There's going to be some trainings and some templates and some guides, and I'm super excited about this. But these are not things that are going to require a sales call with me. These are going to be sub $100 resources. And so what we've done is, as we're building out the sales pages for those resources, we're also building out podcast specific short links so that I can tell who is buying those from this show. And not just buying those, but just visiting the page. Am I getting people to come and look at that content? Another red flag is you feel like you are stuck on the content hamster wheel. Now, I'm going to say that this is maybe more of a yellow flag than a red flag because you might feel this for other reasons beyond it's not working, like it's not generating sales. I have worked with clients before, specifically in production, who have felt like they were on this never-ending hamster wheel, even though they were getting regular sales from their podcast. And it's been either when they signed on with us because they did not have a good fit partner in their previous production partnership, or because of external life cycles. So we have had this happen to production clients who were working with us, but it's because the world is worlding and life is lifing. And so it can be a red flag that your show needs something, and not always necessarily a show isn't working and something needs to drastically change. And the reason I include this is because it's often not about finding something that's going to require, again, this wholesale change, right? This massive restructuring. It can often just be like, oh, hey, my process needs shifted right now. My process as it has been is not serving what I have ahead of me. And so I need to make a change temporarily or permanently to make this work better. So that's something we'll talk more about as we're talking through some of these other pieces. Another one is if you're seeing, and this one's going to feel counterintuitive, but if you're seeing your numbers, like download numbers, stay steady and or they're growing, but you're having zero conversations, you're seeing zero conversions, then something's got to shift. A lot of times I will see this in shows where you've gotten into a nurture and educate mode, meaning that you're so fixed in serving them that you're not clearly enough giving them the next steps to step into a solution with you. And that can be rough. That can be hard to fix because it's going to feel uncomfortable. You're going to be like, this is going to be the response you give me when I tell you that. You're going to go, but Cece, I sell in every episode. I get that. I get that you have a call to action at the end that you're like, oh, hey, that's totally it. But that's not all that it is. There has to be more there. And so if you're seeing those numbers grow, if you're seeing even those numbers hold steady, but you're not seeing any conversions, you're not having any conversations, you're not seeing any of the traffic, it's time to adjust something. It's time to sit down and do the audit we're going to talk about today. The last one, and this is one that frankly is a little feelsy. You're spending too much time on production. You feel like you are constantly in your show, getting it ready to release. This one's big. It is a lift. There's a reason people pay me and my team to do this because it is stuff that has to get done. There are steps that have to be taken. There's also, again, we're launching something in the spring, and so I've been doing a lot of research and seeing what's out there so that we can properly speak to the gaps that we so beautifully fill. And there's some good eggs, and there are some not great eggs. So don't just assume that this means you need to hand it off. It could be about simplifying your process. It could be working with the right production partner. And if you're feeling like you're spending a ton of time in production, and I'm saying this one because we literally just had a production client sign with us who this was the case for them. If you are paying someone for production support and you still are going through and doing things like re-editing podcast episodes, this was an actual thing I heard from a client who just signed with us, who's no longer doing these things. Essentially transcribing podcasts, yeah, real things, then that's a big red flag that it's time to partner with somebody else. And I know that feels like a big lift. I know that feels like an godly undertaking. I get it. I totally get it. Mostly because I am the person so frequently that comes in after that with clients. And so I get that it's a big lift, but with the right partner, it can feel like such a relief. And so have a conversation with me and let's get you into a partnership that really works. But if you're feeling this like I'm always in it, it's time to take a closer look. And that closer look can be doing this audit we're going to talk about, because this audit is really built to help you look at your show and see what's working and what's not working. And this is honestly kind of a DIY version of a shrunk down version of the audit I do when we sit down with clients in podcast strategy intensives. I go through and I ask these questions and frankly a ton more, but I ask these questions first. So the first thing I look at is what episodes performed best. I want you to look at your patterns there, not just the topics, but your format. What were you doing in that episode that helped you retain listeners? What were you doing in that episode that helped you get those listeners? Sometimes this can be as simple as your titles, and sometimes this can be as complex as where your calls to action were, or the fact that you had calls to action, or the fact that it was part of a larger series, or it was just really well optimized. The next thing is, are people taking action after listening? So really tracking your CTA, tracking your calls to action. The first thing you're going to look at when you're looking at this, and you have to be honest with yourself, is are you giving them calls to action? And I don't mean the throwaway call to action to subscribe and join your mailing list that happens in your pre-recorded outro. That is not a call to action. That is an outro. It is a bridge from this to that. It is a Hail Mary call to action. It is not the call to action we're talking about. What I'm talking about is, am I seeing people subscribe to the podcast newsroom? Because I talk about it just about every episode. Am I seeing traffic drive to the podcast strategy intensive page, which I talk about most episodes? Or if it's an episode where I was talking about production, that. If it's some other offer, that. Whatever it is that I call to action. And again, the biggest takeaway when I do this audit in a podcast strategy intensive is that there isn't one. There's zero. There are no intentional, here's your next step kind of conversations. Or there is a solid call to action, but they're not planting any seeds. They're not connecting that. Instead, it's just sort of a like, this episode is sponsored by, come check us out. That's also not a call to action. It's a sponsor message. And it doesn't really tell them what to do. It just tells them how they got the show. So when I'm looking at calls to action, that's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for those planted seeds. And I'm looking for that structured, tied into, here's your natural next step based on the conversation we started today. The third component I want you to look at when you're looking at like your metrics and stuff is, are you utilizing your podcast content to its maximum impact? Have you written an email for it? Have you used it to create some social content that both drives to the episode and drives to the call to action you're talking about? This is something we do internally with every single episode. It's also one of the things that working with a production partner like us, where we take raw audio and give you a finished show with a couple of your marketing assets ready to go. Audiograms, if you're doing a video podcast, we've got short form videos set up, quote graphics, the episode graphics. We've got some of those marketing assets ready for you. If you're not taking those things and then turning that into the social content that's going to drive traffic, you're going to have a hard time, because that's where we're building out this message, right? We're using this transcript to create all these other things. If you've been through this and you're like, I see what episodes are working best with the audience I have, I'm steady, calls to action are working, we're getting those conversions, we're getting that traffic, but you're not seeing your show grow at all, it's going to be time to change your production process so that you have more time to spend on that promotion side of things, because that's make or break, right? Building it, this is not Field of Dreams. Building it is not enough for them to show up. We have to go get them and bring them over. The next piece of this one is so big, because so many of us, especially if you've been in business for a long time, I've been in business 14 years now. I've been in business 14 years now, and this show has existed for 12 of those. If you look at the history of the 600 and some episodes that came before this, you will see the evolution of my business. And oftentimes, we don't remember to fully evolve our content with our offerings, especially if we've been in kind of that messy middle of transition. Our show can kind of keep chugging along in a place that's not actually where we're trying to drive people anymore. The biggest place where I see this, we had this come up on a podcast strategy intensive with a client last year. They had evolved from one-on-one services to group programs, and that was great. It was fantastic, except their calls to action were still pretty consistently around one-to-one work. And most of their conversations in the podcast, so their episode topics, what they were actually presenting as content, spoke to that one-on-one client. It did not speak to the new client who was going to be buying a group program or a self-study course. And so it was really quick for us to go, oh, hey, this is the problem. We're selling the wrong people the wrong thing. And so it came into just sort of tweaking, sort of not even the topic, but like the take, how it was presented, the messaging, the purpose, so that we were talking to the right people. So that's a huge one. Do your episodes clearly guide listeners towards your offers? Again, are you building episodes that are answering the questions people need before they buy from you? It's not just about teaching them what we do. It's about showing them what comes first, giving them the mindset they're going to need to sit down. We talked about this recently in an episode when we talked about how-to content. And this is another great episode of that. It's an example of that. This is how-to content. I'm teaching you how to DIY an audit. But I'm doing that because in DIYing that audit, you are going to get a perspective on your show that allows you to see that I'm your next step. You're going to, instead of feeling like it's working or feeling like it's not working and not really doing anything beyond that, really beyond sitting in that feeling, this is going to give you an action to take to get the clarity and data you need to see that there's something to be done and then do that doing. That's huge. That is a massive shift that's going to pay off, not just for you, but for me, because it's allowing you to identify the need that exists so that you can go, all right, it's time to scratch this itch. It's time to solve this problem. And that's what I want you to be looking for. Not to like really make this super meta, but that's what I want you to be looking to create on your own podcast. What are the questions that you can be having them ask themselves so that they're self-identifying readiness? So that they're going, oh yeah, this is what I need and this is why I need it, which makes it so much easier to lay down that credit card, to make that investment, to sign that contract, to join that program, schedule that call. That's what we've got to be doing. The last piece of this is your production and execution. Again, the most feely, the most vibey, in my opinion. But we can add some fact to this fiction. And the number one way to do that is to get really honest about how much is actually happening. So time tracking, going to be huge. I want you to look at how much time you're actually spending on editing versus your strategy. And by editing, let's loop in there, like getting your show notes done. What is your production as a whole taking right now? Versus how much are you spending planning an episode? How much are you spending prepping your content? If you're spending more time actually getting your episode out the door than you are preparing it to be the asset you need it to be when it gets out the door, there's an issue. That's a problem. And it's a really good sign that it's time to hand off that editing, that production part to someone else. Second component here is, are you batch recording? Are you planning ahead, or are you scrambling each week to get it done? Each week to get it out the door? Are you perpetually in that flow of just checking the content box? Yep, this episode is done. Thank goodness that episode's done. I want you to be instead in proactivity, right? In being proactive about your show and knowing what's coming up. Again, we've got some cool stuff we're going to be launching in the spring and the summer. And so I adjusted my batching schedule to create more space. So more of the episodes that you will hear over the spring and summer have been recorded more early than they normally would have, because I'm going to need to be available for other things. We're going to be launching for the first time in a while, and I want to be available for that. I want to be in that. I want to, as much as I can, as somebody who's not a huge fan of launching, enjoy it. And that means making the steps to make space for it. And this is why outsourcing can really improve your show. Not just from the output is better. And frankly, the output is most often better, depending on who you're working with. But you're so stuck in getting your show out the door that you're not building an asset. You're podcasting for the sake of podcasting. You are fulfilling a commitment right now. And that's great. And that's huge. And it's wonderful. And it's consistent. It's great. But it's not doing the job. That's like saying we hired a janitor and he shows up every day, but the floors are never vacuumed. So why did we hire a janitor? If we knew we needed the floors to be vacuumed every day, and that's why we hired a janitor, but the janitor's not vacuuming the floors. It doesn't matter that he shows up every day. It doesn't matter that he's here every day, because he's not doing the job he was hired to do. Same is true for your podcast. If it's not giving you the visibility, the impact that you want it to have, you need to make a change. That doesn't mean firing the janitor. It means making sure he's equipped to do it. Turns out, never bought him a broom. Never bought him a vacuum cleaner. No wonder the floors remain dirty. You didn't equip him to do the job you hired him to do. And this is most frequently the breakdown for podcasters, is they're not equipping their show to do that job. And that's where working with somebody can change the game. Having someone on your team to sit with you and do this planning, to ask you questions like, what are we selling and who are we selling it to and how are we selling it to them? And then working with you to build out content that speaks to that is powerful. This is one of the reasons, and I'm going to just toot my own horn here, prepare yourself. This is one of the reasons our clients like working with us. Because this is not just about podcasting. This is not just about content. This is about sales and marketing. And I'm somebody who's been doing that a pretty long time at this point. I've got over a decade of experience in both. And so when you sit down with me and we build your strategy, I'm not just looking at it from a podcast perspective. I'm looking at it from a sales and marketing aspect. We had a client just recently who we built an asset that she never would have come up with, that is having a huge impact in her business, that has quickly become her favorite episode. It was her favorite episode before it even released. And it's something that's possible because she partnered with us. It is something she never would have created on her own. So look at partnering with someone who can help you not just get the show done, not just get the show out, not just deliver it, not just have it show up every week to work, but ensuring that it's fully equipped to do the job you've hired it to do, to be the sales team member, to be the marketing person in your business. It also allows you to shift to higher value work. And I am hesitant to say higher value work because I certainly don't want to demean the work my team and I do. It's absolutely high value work. But it's not your high value work. It's my high value work because it's what I do. It's my job. Your high value work is speaking to your clients, is showing up on your sales calls, is showing up in your other marketing channels, is promoting these incredible assets we're building together. You can't do that if you're busy trying to shove your show out the door every week. If you're in an endless loop of I need to have an idea and I need to find time to record it, and I need to clean up the edit in Descript or whatever DIY tool you're using, and then I'm going to shove it out the door and get it into Apple Podcasts, and great, now it's time to work on next week's. Notice what I skipped there? We never marketed that episode. We never promoted that episode. We never repurposed that episode. We never leveraged that episode fully. I'd argue we never leveraged that episode at all. That's the problem. And that's the high value work that I want you to be focusing on instead of shoving your episode out the door every week. If your podcast is not working as hard as you are, we have to fix it. The best way to do that is to partner with myself and my team for production services, is to take the getting your show out the door part off of your plate, because it's going to mean that you and I can sit down every quarter. We're getting ready to go into this with our clients right now, every quarter, and plan what you're going to say, most importantly, why you're going to say it in the next quarter, so that you can then sit down and, if you would like to, batch record. We have clients who do that. We also have some clients who don't. They only like recording one episode a week. And so 3 or 4 weeks before the show is set to go out, they get it recorded and sent over to us, and we get it produced. They still then have a couple of weeks to then get those promotional assets ready, create anything they want to create from that transcript using those show notes. I'll be honest, a lot of our clients repurpose our show notes into their social captions, into their emails. They use that content we've already created. They're leveraging the assets we're building even further so that they can get the results from their show. But they have time to do that because there's someone else handling the getting the show out the door. And so I want you to reach out. I want you to go to uncommonlymore.com/podcast production. And I want to partner so that we do this for your show too, because you do not have to keep doing this alone. Your show can be effective and impactful and a whole lot easier for you if you partner with a production partner who understands the purpose of your show and your business. I will sit down. I will do this audit before we have our kickoff call. We will build that content plan together so that we're answering those questions of what are you selling and who are you selling it to and how are you selling it to them, so that we're building the asset they need to make a decision. I'll see you right back here next week. Thanks so much for listening to the show. Remember that content consumption does not make changes. So commit to doing something from today's episode. Maybe it's taking action on what we talked about. Maybe it's reaching out to me and learning more about podcast strategy intensives or what podcast production looks like with our team. All of that is over at uncommonlymore.com. And if you haven't yet signed up for the podcast newsroom, I want to remind you that is a great next step. If you're not really sure what comes next, hang out over there. Get those exclusive private episodes. That's over at podcastnewsroom.com. And the last favor I will ask, because social proof is endlessly important for sure, is to leave a rating or review for the show. If you go to ratethispodcast.com/more, that's the easiest way to do it. But I would love to hear what you thought of the show, what you think of the show, and if the show has been helpful for you. I can't wait to chat with you. So this is just the start of the conversation. Reach out so we can keep it going. Talk soon.